Perfect. Okay.
to reinforce it. So you look absolutely stunning today.
Well, thank you so much, Howard. How are you doing?
Good. And I can't see any of your tattoos, but I saw the picture at the head of your, yes,
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I've got
your,
several.
yeah, your web page, and it's absolutely astonishing.
Well, thank
Um,
you.
and congratulations on all the magazines that have been publishing your work. Um,
That means so much that you even looked me up. Thank you.
what I didn't get to see yet is the photography itself.
Oh,
Uh,
really?
yeah, I have to look at the. I saw the one picture that heads the site of the woman sitting on a beach, uh, strategically positioned between these two islands of God knows.
That was me.
Yeah, that's so. Um, but next, I'll get to see your photography.
Yes,
So we
definitely.
overcome our technical difficulties. I
Yeah.
leave it up to you.
All right. So I would love to get to know you. Tell me a little bit about yourself. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Buffalo, New York. It's a godforsaken steel town. Used to be a steel town when I was a little kid. Then the steel industry abandoned the United States completely. It was godforsaken then. Actually, it's coming back to life now. It was not a town for a person with a brain.
So obviously you moved. Where did you go from there?
Well, I spent my growing up years in Buffalo. I was shunned by all of the other kids. They didn't want to have anything to do with me. My parents didn't seem to want to have anything to do with me either. So that left me as a totally isolated kid. And then one day in my family's big living room, a book appeared in my lap. And Tristan, you know how you know the location of every book that your parents own because they've all stayed in exactly the same places on the bookshelf ever since you achieved consciousness? Well,
Yeah.
this is that I had never seen before, and I have no idea where it came from. And it was a juvenile book on science. And it said the first two rules of science are these: the truth at any price, including the price of your life. And it gave the example of Galileo. And it pretended that Galileo would have been willing to go to the stake to defend his truth. 30 years later, I found out that's not true. But I needed the heroic version of the story, the mythic version of the story. And the second rule of science: look at things right under your nose as if you've never seen them before, and then proceed from there. Look for the things that are invisible to you and everybody around you that you take for granted. Flush them into visibility, and then proceed from there. And all of a sudden, I had a creed in my life, these first two rules of science, and I had two companions. One was Galileo, and the other one was the guy who illustrated the second rule of science: look at things right under your nose as if you've never seen them before, and then proceed from there. And that was Anton von Leeuwenhoek, the guy who invented the microscope. And Tristan, these are two people who could not do what the other kids did, who could not do what my parents were doing. They could not reject me. Do you have any idea why they couldn't reject me as a playmate?
Tell me.
They were dead. So science became my life. And I started in microbiology and theoretical physics at the age of 10. And at the age of 12, began to accumulate scientific credentials. And I built my first Boolean algebra machine, my only Boolean algebra machine. I co-designed a computer that won some science fair awards. I was granted a meeting with the head of the graduate physics department at the University of Buffalo, at my hometown university. And I'm sure it was supposed to be a 5-minute courtesy meeting, because what head of a graduate physics department wants to meet with a forsaken 12-year-old, for God's sakes? And it ended up being an hour meeting because we were discussing the hottest scientific issue of the day, which was Big Bang versus steady state theory of the universe and the interpretation of the Doppler shift that determines which of those theories is correct. And at 16, I was working in the largest cancer research center in the world, and came up with the theory of the beginning, middle, and end of the universe that predicted something that wouldn't be discovered for 38 years called dark energy. So those are my scientific credentials. So you might want to know how I got involved with rock and roll, which does not seem to be on the same track at all, especially since I was listening to Rachmaninoff, Beethoven, Bartok, and Stravinsky, and wasn't listening to popular music at all. Popular music was the music of the kids who were beating me up. Why would I want to have anything to do with it? Well, when I was 13, I realized I was an atheist. And I put off the realization for about 4 months because I had a bar mitzvah coming up. It's actually when I was 12. and I didn't want to blow the presents, and it was the first party I was ever going to be invited to in Buffalo, New York. So, so I waited until after the bar mitzvah was over. Then I spent 2 months writing thank you notes to all the people who had piled in the presents. And then I was finally free to confess to myself that I was an atheist. Well, it was the end of August and the beginning of September on the Jewish calendar. The high holidays happened. And those are the most holy days in the entire Jewish calendar. And my parents were not observant. They only went to the temple for bar mitzvahs and weddings. But this was extremely important to them. So they got me into a suit. I don't know how they did that because I hated suits. They got me into their 4-door blue Fraser automobile. I don't know how they did that either. They got me all the way to Richmond Avenue, which is where the synagogue was, and I refused to go any further. So as I was holding onto the door frame of the car and my parents were trying to pull me by the ankles out of the car, I had a realization. And the realization was, since there are no gods in the heavens, after all, I'm an atheist, and no gods under the earth, are there gods in this scene? Yes, there are gods. Where are they? They're in my parents. They're in the intense passion with which my parents are intending to drag their firstborn child up the pavement as if he were a sack of potatoes in order to get him to the synagogue. And if the gods are in my parents, then those gods are inside of me. So Galileo's trick was to take an instrument that had just been designed for horizontal viewing. It was a military instrument. It had a lens at this end and a lens at this end. And you used it to see enemy troops coming over the horizon before they realized you had a bead on them. It was called a spyglass, brand new high-tech invention. And Galileo had the audacity to turn those lenses up at the heavens. And Anton von Leeuwenhoek also used a lens. He was a draper. He imported fabrics. And he used the lens to see how fine the drapery was, how fine the weave was. And he decided to take that lens he used for horizontal viewing and turn it down and see pond water, in which he discovered what he called animalcules, the whole world of microbes, bacteria, and all of those things, paramecium, protozoans. And so I suddenly realized my job is to take the lens and turn it inside and find the gods inside of us, which meant for some reason finding the ecstatic experiences which did not exist in my synagogue. I don't know how I even had an inkling that they could exist, and finding out how those ecstatic experiences contributed to the forces of history. So that's what led to rock and roll.
Okay, so when did you leave science, or did you just take it with you when you went into the rock and roll, the PR?
Well, I never left science. In my heart and in my mind, I never left science. But my version of science, or science that I came to understand, I started reading 2 books a day, Tristan. So I was reading 1 book a day under the desk at school and another book when I got home at night. And as I understood science, science is about trying to understand every mystery, and even those mysteries that are not on the scientific map. And remember, look at things that everybody around you take for granted, including things the scientific community takes for granted and doesn't think is in its range, its perspective. But when I was 14, I heard that there was a book called The Varieties of the Religious Experience by William James, and it sounded like it was right up my alley. So I spent 4 months trying to find a copy of the book, finally found one, and it was as if William James had taken these astonishing religious experiences, like St. Teresa in her cold stone cell in the middle of the night, feeling Christ come through the walls and penetrate her with what she interpreted to be a spiritual experience so sweet that no one would ever give it up again in their lives, not realizing that it was basically a spiritualized form of orgasm in all probability. But one way or the other, he gave 7 examples of people who had these extraordinary experiences. And it was as if he left them out on a lab bench in Petri dishes and said, it's 1902. I do not have the tools with which to understand these things. I'm leaving them to you 50 years later when you do have the tools to try to understand them. But I'm telling you something, and that is that experiences that can seem to be psychopathic, that can seem to be mental illnesses in the hands of certain people can become the engines of history. So William James was validating what I already felt, which was the ecstatic experience and the forces of history were joined to each other. So when I got it, many years later, I left Buffalo, New York in order to go to Reed College in Portland, Oregon. I was in the top 10% of my class, and it was the class with the highest median SATs of any school in the country that year, higher than Harvard, higher than Caltech, higher than MIT. And despite that, I dropped out 8 weeks before the end of the freshman year, seeking Zen Buddhist Satori, which is one of those kinds of religious experiences that we've been talking about. And I accidentally helped found the hippie movement, which is another story, and it's in my book, How I Accidentally Started the 60s. And then I went back to NYU after 3 years. And when I graduated, I had fellowships in what's now called neuroscience at 4 different universities. And I began to feel that grad school would be Auschwitz for the mind. In other words, I would be giving paper and pencil tests to 22 college students in exchange for a psychology credit. And how many ecstatic experiences was I going to see in that room with those 22 college students? None, absolutely none. How many ecstatic experiences have you had filling out a paper and pencil test? In all probability, 0. So in my junior year, I had been kidnapped by the poet in residence. The poet in residence one day, he thought I was going to be the next great poet to come out of NYU. Poetry was extremely important in my life. And he said, Bloom, when everybody leaves the classroom, I want you to close the door and sit down here, pointing at the bowling out seat. This did not sound good, Tristan. So I waited till everybody left. I closed the door. I sat down in the seat. And he said, look, last year I asked you to be on the staff of the literary magazine. You never even showed up. This year I'm telling you, you are the editor of the literary magazine. You do not even have a faculty advisor. The minute you walk out that door, you are the literary magazine. Now get the hell out of that door. So I walked out of the door and I looked confused as could be, and a kid stopped that I didn't know and said, you look upset about something, can I help you? And I said, yes, I've just been named the editor of the literary magazine. Because Tristan, I hated literary magazines. You could go into any orgy you wanted, no matter how high the quality of the drugs and the sex, with a literary magazine in your hand, put it down on a coffee table, and it would clear the room within approximately a minute. The cover was always an absolutely appalling robin's egg blue. The choice of typeface on the cover was appalling. The whole thing was appalling. So he said, why don't you come downstairs with me for a cup of coffee? Well, remember, I hadn't grown up around kids or parents. So I didn't know basic human rituals. I didn't know what half a cup of coffee meant. But I followed him to a coffee shop, and he ordered a cup of coffee, and I ordered a glass of water. And he asked me one of the most important questions in my life. If you could do anything you wanted with this magazine, what would it be? And I said, it would be a picture book. He said, okay, you've got your answer. So I had assembled a group of artists to turn into an experimental graphics and literary magazine. And we won 2 National Academy of Poets prizes. And our art caused a major stir in the commercial art community. I got calls from the art director at Look magazine, which was this big, gorgeous, twice a month, full color magazine, and Evergreen Review, which was the leading bohemian magazine in the world, and Boy's Life, which was the Boy Scout magazine, but a big, gorgeous, glossy, full color magazine. They all wanted to have meetings with me. I was still in college. And so I jumped ship from my grad school fellowships, and I co-founded an art studio with the artists that I had discovered. And I viewed it as a periscope position from which to look around in the dark underbelly where new myths and movements are made. And I looked at it as a look. I remember that scene with my parents. I had seen that there were gods inside of them, all right? And if there were gods inside of them, there were gods inside of me. And my task had become to find the gods inside of us and look at them with both the tools of everything you have internally that can allow you to experience it and the lens of science. And I felt like I was given a periscope position from which to look around and find the gods inside of our culture. And that eventually led to rock and roll.
Wow. Okay, so tell me about this, because I heard that you've worked with Michael Jackson, you've worked with Prince, Kiss, Bob Marley. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, okay, first step was, oh God, this is a long story. Okay, so when I was 12 years old, I was in 8th grade. And a girl in my class turned her eyes in my direction, and Tristan, that had never happened before, absolutely never happened. And then she made eye contact, and that was even more startling because it hadn't happened before. And she said, I told my mom you understand the theory of relativity. Well, I didn't understand the theory of relativity, but as soon as school got out, I jumped on my bicycle, I pedaled down to the local library. The librarians knew me better than my mother did, literally. That's not a figure of speech. And I said, give me everything you've got on relativity. And they gave me a great big fat book and a little tiny skinny book. So I started with a great big fat book, and it was all equations. It had 7 words of English per page. And I've never understood equations in my life, never. But I made it 50 pages into the book, and I suddenly realized it's 8 o'clock at night in 2 hours. My mom's going to put me to sleep. If I don't understand the theory of relativity by 10 o'clock tonight, tomorrow morning I'm going to be humiliated when I walk into class. So I turned to the little skinny book, and the little skinny book was by Einstein himself. The big fat book was Einstein and 2 collaborators. And there was an introduction. And in the introduction, it was as if Albert Einstein reached out through the pages of the book, grabbed me by the shirt, and put his nose up to mine and said, Schmuck, listen up. To be a genius, it's not enough to come up with a theory only 7 men in the world can understand. To be a genius, you have to be able to come up with that theory and express it so clearly that anyone with a high school education and a reasonable degree of intelligence can understand it. So Albert Einstein, one of my idols, had told me through the pages of a book, you want to be an original scientific thinker, you have to be a writer. And not just any writer, you have to be a really good writer. So I had started writing while I was at the art studio. I had co-designed my own clothes. And one day I had walked into an underground fashion magazine called Rags, wearing my clothes I had co-designed, and carrying our portfolio. And I expected to put the portfolio down on a desk and for all of the women running the magazine to ooh and ah over the pictures. But they didn't even let me open the portfolio. They looked at my clothes, their jaws dropped. They said, do you have more of these? I said, yes, I have a whole closet full of them. Why? And they said, do you think you can write an article about these? So of course, I said yes. And I ran home that night and wrote the article. And then they had me write another 175 articles for them. They made me a contributing editor. And then another one of the contributing editors started her own magazine, Natural Lifestyles. And she asked me to be contributing editor on that too. And one day I was covering a parapsychology conference for Natural Lifestyles. And the deal is I was getting up at 6 a.m, going directly to the typewriter, writing until 8 o'clock, getting dressed, going into the studio, coming home, and sitting at the typewriter till 11 o'clock at night, 7 days a week. And I was getting tired of getting up at 6 o'clock in the morning. So one day somebody walked up to me at a parapsychology conference I was covering, mind readers and spoon benders and stuff like that, and said, he saw the notepad in my hand and how busily I was taking notes the whole time. And because I have no memory, if I don't take notes, I don't remember anything. So he said, would you like to edit a magazine? Well, that sounded good, because if I edited a magazine, I could do my writing during the day and wouldn't have to get up at 6 a.m. And my artist had just voted me out of the studio, which is a long story, after 3 years, and which destroyed their lives, basically, poor souls. They made a big mistake. The leading artist ended up drinking himself to death at an abnormally early age, which wouldn't have happened if we had continued the art studio. But it set me free. And I said yes. Now, in those days, we had no Google. So when I was given an appointment with the magazine's publisher, I couldn't look him up. I couldn't see what the magazine was all about. So I went to this meeting cold, not knowing a thing, and it turned out to be a rock and roll magazine. So over the course of the next year, I totally redesigned what a rock and roll magazine should be. And once I had the formula worked out, we increased our sales 211% in 12 months. And my publisher went to being a wealthy man. And then I was given a job to found a public and artist relations department for Gulf and Western's 14 record companies. And eventually, Seymour Stein, the guy who signed Madonna, the head of Sire Records, who had become a mentor to me, looked into my cubicle one day and said, Schmuck, if you're so smart, why don't you have your own company? And that was a bit of a challenge. So I founded the Howard Bloom Organization, LTD, which is the company that started as nothing. It started on the coffee table of a friend in his living room, but it became the biggest PR firm in the music industry. And I worked with Michael Jackson, Prince, Bob Marley, Bette Midler, AC/DC, Aerosmith, Kiss, Queen, Run DMC, Billy Joel, Billy Idol, Paul Simon, Peter Gabriel, Run DMC, Shaka Khan, the list, and Joan Jett, and the list goes on and on and on. So, except it was different from other PR firms because I watched like a hawk every career in the business. And I kept track of what worked and I kept track of what wasn't working. And I saw when people were about to drop off the edge of a cliff and become two-hit wonders, or when in the case of Joan Jett, she'd been turned down by 26 record companies, and she didn't seem to stand a chance of getting anywhere in the United States. And my PR firm was wickedly more effective than any of the other PR firms. The other PR firms felt that they were doing a good job if they got you 6 stories in a month. I felt we were doing a miserable job if we only got you 60 stories in a month, and we got you an average of 120 stories in a month, and sometimes as many as 750. So, so we were doing a very different kind of publicity than anybody else in the business was doing. But the real trick was that I was a career strategist. And if you were Joan Jett and you were about to disappear off the face of the earth, I could create a tour strategy for you. And if I could hold your manager to it and get it implemented, it could, well, in the case of Joan Jett's manager, I sat him down on a couch and said, look, Kenny, if you work the way I work, 17-hour days, 7 days a week, and you do everything I tell you to, I guarantee you we will have a star in 2 years. I've only made that kind of a statement twice in my life. The other time it was for the lead singer of a band, and I captured the manager of the band in a limousine, and we were bogged down in traffic. This was very deliberate at rush hour, trying to get back into Manhattan from the airport where I'd picked him up. And I said, look, I know your band prides itself on its democracy. I know every member is equal to every other member, but if you let me put all the attention on your female lead vocalist and you cover my with the band, I guarantee you I will give you a star. That was the only other time I said that. And that person, that lead singer's name was Shaka Khan. So at any rate, so these are the only 2 times I've said this. And in Kenny's case, I said, okay, first you need a booking agency to get you out on the road. So I got him a booking agent. And then I got the booking agents who actually deliver dates. And then I called him and said, Kenny, you need a record. I don't care if you only press 350 copies of the record that you made in Sweden, but put your own label on it, whatever you want to call it. If I've got a record, when you go into Cleveland, I can get you stories in the newspapers. If you don't have a record, I can't. So he pressed up more like 6,000 copies of the record. And he did something I hadn't thought of, hiring a promotion man to get the record on the radio. And we started touring, and I dictated every bit of that tour strategy. And I was wrong about the 2 years, having a star within 2 years. We went double platinum in 18 months, in a year and a half.
Wow.
So I had been inaccurate in my vision of what to do with this artist. So that's what I did with you. If you were John Mellencamp or Billy Idol, I saw that you were about to become a 2-hit wonder and to disappear, period. That you were about to disappear without having a following. And I went in, I did something I called secular shamanism. And it went like this. If you came to my office wanting me to work with you, I gave you a little speech. And I said, look, if you expect me to fashion an artificial mask for you, if you expect me to create an image for you, and you want me to sit back here like a guy in a plaid flannel suit and with chomping a cigar and say, kid, I'm going to make you a star with this image, no, I'm going to send you to my best competitor. If you're going to work with me, you have to understand that music is not an exchange of pieces of plastic. It is not an exchange of downloads. It is not an exchange of money. It is an exchange of human soul. And if you're going to work with me, I'm going to find the soul inside of you. I'm going to find the gods inside of you. What do I mean by that? You sit down at 2 o'clock in the afternoon to write a lyric. You're on deadline for an album. You know you can't write a lyric that day. In fact, you wonder how you've ever written a lyric before in your life. And by 4 o'clock in the afternoon on a reasonably good day, there's the lyric in front of you. And maybe once or twice in your life, the lyric is so perfect, it feels it wrote itself through you. I'm going to find the gods inside of you who wrote that lyric. When you go on stage on a really good night, you feel the faces of the audience melting. You feel their eyes widening. You feel their pupils dilating. You feel their energy come together in one giant blob like an amoeba. You feel that amoeba reach a pseudopod out to you, and you feel the energy of whether it's 700 people or 700,000 people reaching out to you, flowing through you as if you're an empty pipe. You have an out-of-body experience. You feel you're on the ceiling watching all of this take place. You feel that energy go to some place around your head, be utterly transmogrified, utterly transformed, and flow back to the audience again. Then you see the pupils widening even farther, and the energy comes flowing back through you. You feel like you have been danced like a puppet, like a marionette on stage. I'm going to find the gods inside of you that danced you for those 70 minutes, and I'm going to introduce them to you. And to do that, I'm going to demand that you give me six weeks to study everything you've ever written, every album cover you've ever put out, every interview you've ever done, every article that's ever been written about you. And then I'm going to come out to whatever environment reflects you the most. And we're going to sit down face to face with no managers, no wives, no assistants, no handlers of any kind, just you and me. And my job will be to find the gods inside of you. And if you're willing to tolerate that process, then I will take you on as a client. So that's what I did. I called it secular shamanism. I did both that and career strategy. So in Billy Idol's case, it came to finding the authentic God inside of him and getting that across to the media. So you could see this was a genuine human being. This was not a gimmick. When Billy Idol came to my office, because he was living in downtown Manhattan, my office was on 55th Street and Lexington Avenue. When he came to my office, he was wearing those leather vests that you saw him with, the skinny little straps and the big biceps and all the nakedness and all the crosses and chains, because that is Billy Idol. That is the real Billy Idol. If you dressed him in any other way, you wouldn't have the real Billy Idol. And what got across the spirit of who Billy Idol was, it was a tattoo on his right bicep. It was a tattoo of an absolutely luscious looking year-old girl superhero. And I asked who she was. And Billy said, that's Octobriana. She's from Russian underground cartoons. She's the spirit of the original 1917 Russian Revolution, the spirit that was trampled on and imprisoned under Stalin and Lenin. Okay, that's who Billy Idol was. In the case of John Mellencamp, that took a lot more digging. But John Mellencamp's story was also astonishing and completely authentic. So then it was a matter of getting those stories across to the media, and ultimately they all made it on the cover of Rolling Stone. Joan Jett didn't, but Billy Idol did. John Mellencamp made it on several times. And because we've gone through a total transition. And the other thing I did for them was tour strategy, because it's with touring that you establish your relationship with your audience and your permanence with your audience. So it was the tour strategy component that added to making these people who were about to disappear superstars, or in the case of a Joan Jett, or a Prince who no one had ever heard of before when I started working with him, making them superstars. And the tour strategy and the publicity were both supremely important. So that's how I got into that business. And so it was a business of finding the gods inside. And look, when I was a magazine editor, when I was given the job of editing Circus Magazine, I went to see a concert by a burned out British blues band. There were two major British blues bands from the late 1960s that were about to burn out and disappear. One was called Chicken Shack, and the other one was called Fleetwood Mac. And this is before Lindsey Buckingham and Stevie Nicks showed up on the scene. And so I was at a concert at Carnegie Hall with Fleetwood Mac and this dying blues band. And when we walked in, we were all very aware of the people around us and trying to look cool for them. And when we sat down, we were very aware of the people on either side of us and the people behind us, and we needed to look cool. And then the lights went down in the auditorium, the lights came up on the stage, and the music began, and we began to lose our sense of self-consciousness and become more and more absorbed with what was going on the stage. And a half hour into the show, the lights suddenly went down and the sound went out. All the electricity to the stage went out, and the lights came back on the audience. And we began to lose that magic of having melted and having disappeared into the experience on stage. And our self-consciousness was just about to return. And all of a sudden, Mick Fleetwood stepped to the edge of the stage, and without sound, remember Carnegie Hall was originally designed for acoustic performances. Without sound, he said, the power has gone out, but we are gonna fucking goddamn rock and roll. And they continue to make their music acoustically, which is not easy with dead electric guitars. And he galvanized us. He galvanized us in a way we could never have achieved if we hadn't been through that crisis of losing the electricity on the stage and the lights going on over our heads. And suddenly we were back on an even higher level than we'd been before. And I realized I was in the lands where the gods are, finally. That I was in the middle of the ritual that brings the gods alive inside of the people on the stage and the people in the audience. So by total accident, I ended up where I had wanted to be ever since I was 13 years old.
Wow, by complete accident.
Yes.
That's incredible. It seems like you have done so much with your life. That is phenomenal. So tell me a little bit about CFS.
Oh God, CFS is terrible, Tristan. So,
you don't have to talk too much about it. Just give me a brief about it.
well, a brief about it is that in my case, it meant that eventually I became so sick that I could, there was a day when I could not even lift up my hands to a keyboard. I became so sick that the only place I could walk was to my bathroom, which is only 3 steps across the hall from my bedroom. I became so sick that I couldn't speak for 5 years, that I was nauseous every second of the day, and that I was also so weak and my stress system was so out of whack that I couldn't have another person in the room with me. And solitary confinement is one of the most painful things you will ever experience in your life. It brings to life pains inside of you for which there are literally no words in the English language. But during that time, I created 2 international scientific groups, and I wrote 3 books.
Wow.
And I got the first 2 of my books published. So it turned out to be a very fruitful and productive time, and I learned a lot from being that sick. I'm, in a sense, very lucky that I was that sick. Also, I had a problem. I had just come out of the music industry. The Billboard Guide to Music Publicity said I had reinvented PR in the music industry and devoted 20 pages to me. This is a textbook for students who want to learn how to do PR in the music industry, and it's got 20 pages of just me. Well, in science, my original field, that's a stigma. If people say this is a rock and roll publicist, there goes all of your credibility. So I had to work on my credibility in science. So by now, I have published articles, or I have spoken at scholarly conferences in 12 different scientific fields: quantum physics, cosmology, neuroscience, evolutionary biology, psychology, biopolitics, information science, governance, and even in aerospace. So I basically, and I've left a lot of fields out that I can't even remember. So I've reestablished my scientific credibility, at least about as much as I'm going to be able to do it in this lifetime. So that left me free for the first time to actually write my rock and roll memoirs. And Einstein, Michael Jackson, and Me: A Search for Soul in the Power Pits of Rock and Roll, which is my current book, my new book. That's the book in which I tell you all about all of these rock and roll adventures. And that means talking about my adventures with 27 of the major superstars of the 70s and the 1980s. And because music hangs around these days, you can still find videos on YouTube of all of my artists. You can still hear their music anytime you want. It's been recorded. It's not like the 1800s when you had great musicians, but there were no recordings, so they've all disappeared. We'll never hear them again. Now you can hear them. And there are a lot of kids, and this is bizarre to me, who are into the music of the 70s and the 80s. Yeah. So these are basically enduring superstars of our time. And Michael Jackson in particular deserves to be an enduring superstar for all time, as far as I'm concerned, because he's the most astonishing, amazing, unbelievable person I've ever met in my life. And if we all model our lives on Michael Jackson as a role model, the human race will take a giant step up in its capacities for awe, wonder, and surprise, which are his great gifts. And we need that because we're continually, as a civilization, continually pushing the boundaries of the perceptual envelope. And Michael pushed those boundaries more than any human I ever expected to see in my life. He was the living embodiment of the first two rules of science: the truth at any price, including the price of your life, and look at things right under your nose as if you've never seen them before, and then proceed from there. He was their living incarnation.
Wow. So it's needless to say, Michael Jackson was one of your favorites that you've worked with.
Michael Jackson changed my life. You know, I do a show called Coast to Coast AM. It's the highest rated overnight talk radio show in North America. And I've done it something like 348 times now. And after the first 6 years of doing the show, my producer called and she said, you know, we love to have you on the show, but could you please stop talking about Michael Jackson? That's how obsessed I was with Michael Jackson. Remember, I'm a person who came from Rachmaninoff, Beethoven, Bartok, and Stravinsky. Oh my God, I forgot to turn this off. So we have to, that's my former 21-year-old girlfriend. I just turned 77 on Thursday. So we'll have to call her back. But at any rate, so now I've moved up. So now I have a 26-year-old girlfriend. I'm going for older women these days. So at any rate, I mean, I wish I could tell you the stories about Michael because they're just gobsmacking. They're just amazing. But yes, if I had to undergo this entire thing, including the 15 years of illness, just to have the privilege to become a confidant of Michael Jackson's, to be close to Michael Jackson, because I was close to Michael Jackson, it would have been worth it. Tristan, it would have been worth it.
That's incredible. I'm so happy to hear that too, because I was wanting to know if you had gotten close with anybody. So,
well, in this book, I tried to give you a sense. Here's why I try to give you a sense of who Michael Jackson really was, which I feel is absolutely essential that you and everybody else on this planet know. Because, as I said, he sets new boundaries for the perceptual envelope of mankind, new boundaries for the envelope of human possibility. In 1954, every physiologist worth his salt knew that it was impossible to run a mile in less than 4 minutes. But a guy named Roger Bannister was a medical student in Britain, and he had a friend, and the two of them examined his running and found every single move in his running that was wasting energy. And they redirected every move toward maximizing his energy. And the result was that Roger Bannister did something the physiologist said was impossible. He ran a mile in less than 4 minutes. And that set a new standard for the human race. It set a new standard in the envelope of human possibility. And the result was that if you look up the 4-minute mile on Wikipedia, it will tell you that every major professional competitive runner breaks the 4-minute mile. 1,600 or 1,800 people have done it since Roger Bannister did it. Michael Jackson was the Roger Bannister of awe, wonder, and surprise. The first day I met Michael, his brothers had hired me. And I had gone to their hotel room at the Helmsley Palace. Look, their manager had been calling me for 4 months. And for 4 months, I'd been turning him down. And I'd been turning him down for a very simple reason. I said, look, you got a talking dog to say Michael Jackson on the phone, and any magazine editor anywhere in the country would give you a cover in exchange for an interview. So you don't need me to do that. I don't do that kind of thing. Well, then they called one day and they said, the Jacksons are coming into New York City. They're going to be at the Helmsley Palace Hotel. And they want to meet you. And I couldn't say no for a simple reason. Now, remember, I hadn't grown up among other human beings. I hadn't learned human rituals. But I'd heard this sentence: if you want to say no to somebody, you owe them the decency, the courtesy of saying no to their face. So I couldn't refuse the meeting. So I went in Saturday at midnight. They kept strange hours. The weekend was my hardest working period of the week because I had 2 days with no phone calls. And I could really concentrate on every single campaign of every single client and figure out where we'd gotten so far and where we needed to go from there. It was excruciatingly important work. But, you know, I needed to be polite to the Jacksons. So I got to one of the top floors of the Helmsley Palace, knocked on this white with gold trimmed door, and the door opened 2 inches, and I immediately realized I was going to have to say yes to the Jacksons. And the reason was simple. There was an ad for recording tape cassettes back in those days. The guy was sitting in an easy chair like mine, and he was plastered up against the back of the seat like this. And there was a fan, a wind tunnel fan of some kind, blowing on him at God knows 140 miles an hour or something. So he was plastered up against the back of the seat, and his hair was straight back into the wind. Well, I saw 4 brothers up against the wall through that 2-inch opening in the door. And I saw them up against that wall as if they were in that tape commercial. And something was instantly apparent in just a second. And that was, these are 4 of the most decent guys you've ever seen in your life, and they are up against a problem. So I walked in and immediately said yes. And without knowing what the problem was, and no one ever told me that there was a problem, Tristan. It was just obvious that there was a problem, even though nobody, including me, could articulate it. So I was working with the Jacksons for 4 months, and I was out at Marlon Jackson's pool house. And a pool house is a little building that's just big enough for 1 room on the first floor and 1 room on the second floor. And the room on the first floor had video arcade games all the way around the walls, which is astonishing, because no normal human can afford a single video arcade game, much less a whole bunch of them lined up against the walls. And there was a billiard table in the middle of the room. And the Jacksons had me in the middle, and they were flanking me on either side. And we were looking at tour jackets and T-shirts. And I was trying to explain to them that when it comes, this is called merchandising, that when it comes to your T-shirts and your tour jackets, you try to put on the most astonishing show anyone has ever seen. So your T-shirts have to be the most astonishing T-shirts anyone has ever seen, and your tour jackets have to be the most astonishing anyone has ever seen. And then I heard the screen door opening. Now, somebody, when I was 19 years old, had taken me aside and said, look, if there's somebody walking into a room that other people want you to meet, you go over to that person, you stick out your hand, you say, hi, my name is Howard. And they will stick out their hand and they will say, hi, my name is so-and-so. But I had never done it before. And I had read literally 1,000 stories, a stack of press clippings this thick, saying that Michael Jackson is a bubble baby, and if you reach out your hand to touch him, he will withdraw in fear. So the one who was like that, by the way, was Prince. But so I walked over to the door. For the first time in my life, I stuck my hand out. I said, hi, I'm Howard. And the person coming through the door stuck his hand out, then took mine and gave me a very normal handshake. And he said, hi, I'm Michael. And I said, I've got a press release to read to you. I need to get your approval on it. Can I read it? And he said, yes, why don't we go upstairs? So we went up the stairs. The second floor room was stacked literally floor to ceiling with amplifiers and keyboards. So Michael sat on one amplifier, I sat on another amplifier, and I started to read Michael this press release. Now you have to remember, I'd become obsessed with writing when I was 12 because Einstein had told me that to be an original scientific thinker, you need to be not just any writer, you need to be a superb writer. And I had been the art director and editor of the literary magazine at NYU, and we'd won 2 National Academy of Poets prizes. So when I wrote a press release, it wasn't an ordinary press release. I was putting everything I had learned about writing in all of those years, almost 2 decades, of being obsessed with it, into my work. But no one had ever seen that, ever. And I got 2 sentences into the press release, and Michael began to slump in his seat a little bit. And he said, oh, until we finally got to the end of the press release. And he said, man, that was beautiful. Did you write that? No one, Tristan, no one had ever seen the art in the writing I did. I was the only the only president of a major PR firm who did all the writing himself. Why? Because if you were one of my account executives, and I wanted to get across the vision that I had gotten of this artist from my day with that artist with no intercessors, from finding that artist's gods inside, I was going to have to write this thing myself. If I turned it over to another writer, he'd never get it. He'd never be able to get across what I wanted to get across to the public. Well, okay, I'm going to stop the story for just a second. I used to tell my artists, you don't just owe your audience your songs. You owe your audience your life. And for the first 20 years after I said it, I knew it was true, but I didn't know what it meant. And what it meant is this. If I'm going to work with you, the way I worked with Joan Jett or Billy Idol, or John Mellencamp, or Prince, we're going to work to get kids when they're 11 and a half and 12 years old and their sexual hormones are beginning to course through their system and they're going through a major change in life and it's confusing as hell. We want them to put your posters up on their bedroom walls. They're going to imprint on you. You know what a trellis does for a tomato? No, a trellis is a vertical framework, and the tomato doesn't have stalks stiff enough to keep it up in the air. So it crawls along on the ground. But you don't want your tomatoes to do that because if tomatoes are touching the ground, they're likely to go rotten. You want your tomato plant to grow straight up, but it can't do that by itself. So you put up a wooden frame and you tie the tomato plant to the wooden frame, and the tomato plant grows on the wooden frame. Well, if we're going to make you an icon, you're going to be a trellis on which other people will grow. And that's why you owe your audience your life, not just your songs, because your life is going to be the trellis on which new generations will grow. Well, there couldn't have been a more wonderful trellis than Michael Jackson on planet Earth. So Michael and I went downstairs and we had a meeting with the art director from CBS. She walked in with 5 of the most gorgeous portfolios you've ever seen. I carried in my art studio days a black vinyl portfolio. These were hand-tooled cherry wood and hand-tooled leather. And they were all from people I knew from my days in the art business as the absolute legends in the industry. And she slid the first portfolio across the green felt of the billiard table to us. And Michael and I were standing, my right shoulder was up against his right shoulder, my right elbow was up against his left elbow, my right knee was up against his right knee or left knee, and the brothers were flanking us and pressing us in from either side. And the first portfolio was from an artist named Michael Whalen, whose work is absolutely phenomenal. Michael started to open the first page of the portfolio. He got a square inch in front of him, and his knees began to buckle. And he went, oh, 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 oh. He was having an aesthetic, the equivalent of St. Teresa in her cell with Christ coming through the walls. He was having it over a picture. And you could tell, you know how William Blake writes about seeing the infinite in the tiniest of things? He was seeing more in that first square inch of picture than Michael Whalen, the artist, had seen. He was seeing more in that entire picture than Michael Whalen, the artist, had ever seen. He was seeing level after level after level of astonishment in that picture. Well, that is the second law of science. Look at things right under your nose as if you have never seen them before and then proceed from there. Michael was it beyond anything I ever imagined possible in a human being. It was astonishing. I had to go through this bizarre elliptical series of unlikely adventures in order to get to the very spot I started in at the age of 12, the first 2 laws of science. And as far as the first law of science is concerned, one day, well, I used to keep a little red $19.95 nylon knapsack behind my desk at 55th Street and Lexington Avenue in our 2-story office. And it had a spare shirt, a razor blade, and a toothbrush, and a TRS-100, which is the very first laptop computer. And I kept it there in case of emergencies. So I got an emergency call, and these were very common. But this one was a little bit different. They said, you have to be out here, meaning California, meaning LA, by 11 o'clock tonight. Michael is canceling his tour, and you're the only one he'll listen to. So I got my staff to get me an airline ticket and to get me a car, and I ran down the stairs to the car, and I headed out for LA. Well, when I got my rental car and I went to the address I'd been given, it was a very strange place. It was a studio lot. And studio lots at night are very weird because they have about 5 buildings that are like aircraft hangars. They're huge buildings with, you know, these curved roofs. And and they're so huge that they just swallow light. And 4 of them were dark, and 1 had light in it. But again, the light was swallowed. And I walked in, and there was a 110-foot stage, and the Jacksons were rehearsing on it. Now, to give you an idea of the size of a 110-foot stage, in 1976, ZZ Top decided to take Texas culture to the world. And they had a stage built in the shape of the state of Texas that was tilted at an angle so you could see that it was in the shape of the state of Texas. And it was 75 feet. The Jackson stage was about 60% larger. It was the biggest stage I'd ever seen in my life. So I waited until the Jacksons finished rehearsing, and then there was a dresser trailer outside. Have you ever been in a dresser trailer?
Mm-mm.
It's a truck, basically, with a huge van in the back that's been converted into a dressing room. So we filed into the dressing trailer. Now, something you have to understand, the tour was in terrible trouble. The press had been picking on this tour mercilessly. I'd never seen anything like it in my life. And a guy named Dave Marsh in particular, who's one of the lead sheep in the press. By lead sheep, I mean anything he printed, everybody else in the press would print too in the rock press. Dave Marsh was saying, no one we know, we meaning the elite of the rock critics, no one we know has been hired to do the staging. We know everybody in the business. Since nobody we know has been hired to do the stage, it's going to be done by amateurs and the stage will collapse. Nobody we know has been hired to do the sound, so the sound is going to electrocute the performers. Nobody we know has been hired to do the lighting, so those giant 5-story tall lighting towers are going to collapse on the audience and kill people. And nobody we know has been hired to do security, so gangs are going to be running up and down the aisles with knives, and you don't dare take your children to these concerts. It was ghastly. Well, Michael, we took our seats. There were 2 banquettes of seats on either side of the trailer and 1 little tiny banquette next to the entrance, and that was the throne. So Michael took the throne, and I took the seat to his immediate left. And Michael explained to me why the tour had been susceptible to such negative publicity. He said, a year and a half ago, I went looking for the best stage people, the best lighting people, the best sound people, and more important, the best magicians and special effects people. And I made them all sign an NDA, a non-disclosure agreement. They signed to absolute secrecy. That's why Dave Marsh didn't know who was doing the staging and the sound, because they'd been sworn to secrecy. And Michael explained, look, God has given me this astonishing quality of awe, wonder, and surprise, which you have seen. And because God has given that to me, I owe that gift to my kids. And when Michael was explaining this, I had the only visual vision of my life. Remember, I had visions with Shaka Khan and visions with Joan Jett, but those weren't visual. This one was visual. And I saw Michael's chest as golden gates, and I saw his ribs opening like gates, and I saw 10,000 kids inside his chest. And Michael said, look, my brother Jackie is the best dancer in the world. Now look at who is saying this. Michael Jackson was the greatest student of dance of the 20th century. He studied everybody from James Brown to Fred Astaire. And if he says somebody is the greatest dancer he's ever seen, that is the most expert opinion on planet Earth, literally.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, my brother Jackie has come down with a bone chip in his knee. Well, I knew that because I had organized the press conference with the arthroscopic surgeons when Jackie had arthroscopic surgery to remove that bone chip. And he said, we expected Jackie to be better in time for the tour date, and he's not better. And so I have to postpone the tour until Jackie is better because I owe my audience the best, the most amazing show they've ever seen. And if my brother Jackie is not in it, it will not be the most amazing show it could be. And I explained to Michael, look, the credibility of your tour is zero. Everybody has been claiming that your tour is going to be amateur. And I explained to him what Dave Marsh has been saying. And I said, if you cancel this tour, if you even postpone it, it will validate every claim of amateurism that has ever been made. And parents will not dare take their kids to your concert. And this is like 2 prophets going up against each other, because Michael has absolute conviction about needing to protect his kids and give them something astonishing, beyond astonishing. But I know with absolute precision what is going to happen if Michael makes the wrong move. And I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but sometimes when every cell in your body is convinced of something, you speak with a very different voice. You're not speaking anymore, you're evangelizing, or you're profiting, you're doing what Isaiah did. And so Michael listened, and he changed his mind, and the tour went on, unfortunately without Jackie. But the tour went on. So how does this relate to my 10-year-old experience with the first two rules of science? It's the truth at any price, including the price of your life. Michael was willing to do everything in his power to give his kids the truth as he saw it, the truth of awe, wonder, and surprise. His conviction was absolute. So in Michael, I had run into the first two laws of science incarnate, not in the science community, but in all places, the music business. So I could not have voluntarily chosen and mapped out a path so precisely designed to take me exactly where I needed to go. And now I have all those lessons in me, and I'm unpacking them. And unpacked a lot of them in this book. So this book has been praised. Einstein, Michael Jackson, and Me, A Search for Soul and the Power Bits of Rock and Roll, has been praised for the depths of philosophy, for being a page turner. You can't put it down. And one of the most remarkable statements, which is made by several of the reviewers, is even if you have never been interested in rock and roll in your life, this book is a page turner, and it gets across a deeper philosophy that could change your life. So that's what the reviews are saying, basically.
I cannot wait to get my hands on it. I'm gonna have to read it.
Well, I hope you get your hands on it, because I'd like to hear what you think of it.
Yeah, I'd love to leave you a review on your page and everything.
So that's the basic story. I should probably let you go because it's 7:07 in the evening, and I think I have a 7:30 meeting or something. There's a company that's basing an artificial intelligence on my ideas about complex adaptive systems. So we have a meeting tonight. But any last questions?
Honestly, the only thing I really have to ask you is, what advice would you give somebody who is in a negative headspace right now?
Who is what? I missed some of the words.
What advice would you give to somebody in a negative headspace right now?
Oh, in a negative headspace?
Yes.
Okay, look, you're surrounded by positives even though you don't know it. And your salvation is in other human beings. Your salvation is doing things of value for your fellow human beings. And if you follow your passions, whatever they may be, it is very likely you will come up with something that is of value to your fellow human beings. I was in clinical depression from the age of 13 until I got out of bed in 2003. That's a long time. I can't even do the arithmetic on that. It's like 50 years. So every day I woke up feeling of no value to anybody else on earth. But if you keep following your passions, you will come up with things that are of use to your fellow human beings, and they will begin to validate you. And it may not cut through the negativity. It may not cut through the emotional pain, but it will help. And gradually it will build a scaffold that will lift you just a little bit further every year from that pain.
That's incredible. Thank you so much, Howard. I want to keep up with you in the future.
Okay, thank you, Tristan. Hopefully we'll get together again soon.
Definitely. I can't wait to talk with you. Enjoy your evening.
Okay, have a great night.
You too. Bye.